Hi everyone, my name is Emily Kohowick, and I'm doing a presentation on the poem Queer by Frank Bidart. So this is Frank Bidart. He was born in 1939 and he is 83 years old. A little bit about Frank. He grew up in a Christian household, which made it hard for him to be gay and come out because of the time he was living in. Bidart was elected as a Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets in 2003. And he is an American academic and poet and a winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. He's gay, and when Bidart was in graduate school at Harvard, he attended a poetry workshop taught by Robert Lowell. This is where he fell in love with poetry. He is a native of California and considered a career in acting or directing when he was young. So it's obvious that he has been in love with the arts and stuff like that since he was quite little. And then he has many critically acclaimed poems, one of which being Ellen West, where he writes from the perspective of a woman with an eating disorder, and similarly a poem called Herbert White, where he writes from the perspective of a psychopath. And I think this is why his poems are so popular, because he's not afraid to write from the perspective of many different people, and I think that it invokes a lot of thought within others. A little summary about the poem that I chose. It's a poem about coming out of the closet from the perspective of a man growing up in the 40s and 50s, and how difficult it was to go against the social norms that were presented to him throughout his childhood. The poem is about being a gay person in both childhood and adulthood, and how his experiences had differed between the two. It talks about the heteronormativity that is associated with being born into to a straight couple, and similarly in a straight central society, and how that influences queer children. And then the author has a strong feeling to come out, but feels that he is unable to, since America during the time wasn't friendly to homosexuals. And this is when he was a child. This is my poem, Queer.
Peekaboo, Paul Stamets character. Welcome to the enchanted forest of Host Defense. Here, hidden. Queer. Lie to yourself about this, and you will forever lie about everything. Everybody already knows everything, so you can lie to them. That's what they want. But lie to yourself. What you will lose is yourself. Then you turn into them. For each gay kid whose adolescence was America in the 40s or 50s, the primary, the crucial scenario forever is coming out. Or not. Or not, or not, or not, or not. Involuted velleities of self-erasure. Quickly after my parents died, I came out. Foundational narrative designed to confer existence. If I had managed to come out to my mother, she would have blamed not me, but herself. The door through which you were shoved out into the light was self-loathing and terror. Thank you, terror. You learned early that adults' genteel fantasies about human life were not for you, life. You think sex is a knife driven into you to teach you that.
So that was my poem. And then line by line analysis. My poem is a bit long, so I decided to do it in stanzas. So the first stanza is, lie to yourself about this, and you will forever lie about everything. Everybody already knows everything, so you can lie to them. that's what they want. But lie to yourself, what you will lose is yourself. Then you turn into them. The first thing I noticed about this stanza is that it uses italics as a way to give more definition to the poem. I think it adds emphasis and wants you to pay more attention to those words. And then it talks about being true to yourself and how lying to yourself only hurts you more. As it says in the first line, lying to yourself about this, he's talking about being queer or gay, and if you lie to yourself that you're not gay, you will lie about everything, and you will no longer become the person who you were meant to be or your true self. And then if you lie to yourself, you are becoming part of the ignorance. And I think this is part of the line where it says, so you can lie to them, that's what they want. Within the society and the social norms, everyone wants to be the same. And so if you lie to yourself to become part of the whole and not your true self, you're being ignorant of who you truly are and just trying to mesh with society. The second stanza is for each gay kid whose adolescence was America in the 40s or 50s, the primary, the crucial scenario, forever is coming out, or not, or not, or not, or not, or not. This shows the poetic device of repetition during or not, or not, or not, and I think this adds a lot of emphasis and really shows how hard it is for people to decide whether or not to come out. And then it explains the hardships of coming out against societal norms, where it is seen as normal to be straight, and going against that, while it is staying true to yourself, can be hard because you'll be seen as an outsider and not as normal as everyone else. And then another poetic device we can see is enjambment in the 7th line, where it is forever is coming out or not. There's that gap, but in order to understand the full line, you have to keep reading. The third stanza is a singular line, involuted velleities of self-erasure. This exemplifies the mood of the poem and how it is thoughtful, and how being true to yourself is the only way to keep yourself going. The author lived with heteronormativity and societal norms, and these made him feel less than who he was, and in order to fix that, he has to be true to himself and not erase who he truly is. The next stanza is, quickly after my parents died, I came out. Foundational narrative designed to confer existence. If I had managed to come out to my mother, she would have blamed not me but herself. The door through which you were shoved out into the light was self-loathing and terror. It discusses coming out once again and shows the true difficulties, especially when coming out to your parents, which is something that everyone struggles with. And then it talks about the foundational narrative that is pushed against people. Just the idea that everyone has to be straight with a wife or husband and kids and just the perfect American family that is heavily stressed onto kids these days, and not everyone wants to be like that. And it's very hard for some people to decide not to follow this path. And then it shows the ideology that being queer is bad when it says, if I had managed to come out to my mother, she would have blamed not me but herself. I think this was especially prevalent during the times in which he was a child, because it would have sort of shown that like the mother thought she was at fault because it was seen as a disappointment and that she failed her child because he was queer. And then italics are used to show thought and dimension again, and it compares coming out or being true to yourself as being shoved into the light. And then the final stanza is, thank you, terror, You learned early that adults' genteel fantasies about human life were not, for you, life. You think sex is a knife driven into you to teach you that. Personification is used to give life to inanimate things. This is shown when he is thinking the emotion terror. And then he talks about how some people see the world and their fantasies do not line up with others. And this is along the lines of that personal narrative that is being pushed onto people, and how many people see the world as one thing, and when people go against that, their lives do not line up and they disagree. And it shows that memories of some experiences can be cruel and teachable, and that you learn from these lessons and you learn from life. And then it uses a metaphor saying sex is a knife. And this metaphor could be referring to either the violence of being shoved through that door in the previous stanza, and how it is comparable to coming out and the terror that you feel. Or it could also be the rough reminder that the author's sexuality goes against the norms he grew up with, and how difficult it is for him. And then the mood of the poem, I think the mood of the poem is thoughtful. It really invokes thought into the reader, and kind of shows how the author was feeling during his childhood and growing up being queer. And the narrator himself is struggling with how the world perceives him, as he wants to be true to himself and come out, but it's a lot harder to go against the societal norms because there could be judgment or pushback. And the mood is dependent on the poetic devices that help move the poem along. There are many poetic devices that are used to give the poem a more thought-based, so you can truly see what the author was feeling, and that kind of is resembled within the mood. And then the poem pattern. Although the poem was written in free verse, I think it was written with a jumbled type of thought pattern. You can truly feel, or you can truly see what the author was thinking when he wrote some of the lines and his true feelings. And then repetition is used throughout. For example, the or not, or not, or not. I think this adds a lot of emphasis to those words and makes you really think about them. This is also true with exclamation points, italics, and spaces. They're used throughout to add dimension to the poem and to really emphasize what his thoughts were. And the speaker of the poem is in first person. We can see this because the author uses the word I. I think the author chose this narrative because the poem refers to himself. These were his experiences and how his life was before coming out, and the societal norms that he had, and how he's struggling with his family. So he puts the poem in first person because, again, these are his thoughts and his feelings. And the understanding could shift if the narrator was different, because we get a different perspective. They would have a different life and different experiences. However, when reading from different perspectives, we would visualize the story differently. So because we were reading it in the perspective of the first person, so the author, Frank Bidart, we read the poem through his eyes. The theme. There are many themes within the poem. However, it's dependent on the person who's reading it and their previous life experiences. For example, someone who's queer might see it differently than someone who's not, or someone who is experiencing heavy societal norms and doesn't know how to feel about it. Everyone would find the poem different. However, the narrator does talk about finding your true self and the inner peace that is associated with that. And this correlates with the theme of heteronormativity and social norms, where people are being pressured to live out a specific narrative. It also, queer identity and coming out are discussed, and that wraps up all the themes. They kind of lean on each other. There is a connection to society, becoming our true selves, and the inner peace that is associated with that. I think it is really important to be true to ourselves. And the poem was written in 2012, which is during the time when gay marriage started to get legalized. And I think this influences the poem because during his childhood it was seen as illegal to marry who he loved, but during the time this was written, the government was sort of proposing legalizing the gay marriage. And then this poem is relevant now because it talks about both things such as social norms and queer identity, and represents the LGBTQ plus community, which is all stuff that's so prevalent today in today's society because it's becoming more normal. And social norms, I think, are heavier than ever now, especially with the introduction of social media, and we see more of people, and whether or not they're being true to themselves, we want to fit in. There's also a reference to the 40s and 50s of America and how his childhood growing up would be different than those of the queer children growing up now, because today's society is different with LGBTQ standards. And then just talks about the specific narratives and social norms that many people fall into. My personal connection, I chose this poem because it's about internalized homophobia, which I believe most people, queer people, struggle with. It's something super prevalent today and hurts a lot of people. And I believe everyone should be true to themselves and not live for other people, which I think is heavily talked about within this poem. A lot of people want to fit in today's society, which is just really popular. And not everyone is being true to themselves because they are afraid that if they're not like everyone else, they will become an outcast. And the issues talked about within the poems are things I've experienced before. Everyone has experienced a social norm before, and I think people can relate to this poem whether they are queer or not. Excuse me. And then Frank Bidart's poems often force me to think a lot about, they just inflect or invoke a lot of thought within me, and I think his poems are things I can relate to. Sorry. And then some questions for the class. Have you ever felt like you had to follow a specific narrative, or felt pressured to become a specific person or follow a specific path? And did you or did you not? And how did this influence your life? And then what would help you bring inner peace to yourself and help you be truly free? I think this is important for people. And how would it affect you if you decided to become more like your true self? And what's something that you could do now to help push that along? And then what is the social norm that has influenced your life the most? Whether it be big or small, everyone has fallen into a societal norm and has followed it in order to be like everyone else. And what is one that has influenced you? And that is my presentation.